Well, hi, as Hugh introduced me, I've been doing some research around Stonehenge and Avebury because, I love the monuments and I love the ancient landscape, a bit like you guys, that's why you're here. And I always think the monuments are so almost overwhelming. They're huge, like Stonehenge, and you've got the massive stones of Avebury, that sometimes we forget about the people that built these, the people that went along and worshipped and looked at these sites maybe through different eyes than we do today. So it got to a couple of years ago, I was not having a happy time in my life. And my great friend Rusty said, Maria, if you don't give yourself a break, you are going to have a breakdown. He said, so I want you to think about something to distract you. I was having a tax audit, and it's really, really stressful. And I thought, well, my late father taught me how to find water and minerals in the landscape. And I thought, what if I spiritualized that? What if instead of looking for something, like underground water or lays, that I look for the people of the landscape? And I thought it'd be a little bit of project, it'll distract me. So that's how I got to kind of discover these things I'm going to be talking about today. And we're going to be talking about a long-lost Neolithic woman, because in prehistory, we don't really hear that much about females. We've all heard of Boudica, of the Iceni tribe with the Romans, and Queen Maeve of Ireland, but hardly anything's mentioned about the women. So this is looking at a discovery about a woman of Stonehenge, and I'm sure that she had a leading role, and we'll discover why. So I decided to use what's called the 2-point fix in dowsing by getting a map and looking at one part at the top and one at the bottom. It's literally where X marks the spot is where you find something. And I had X marks the spot, and it happened to be a barrow, and that's what we're going to be looking at. Has anyone been to the Salisbury Plain? Yeah. Isn't it beautiful? I mean, it is owned by the military, so a lot of the UFO buffs in the area call it Area 51. I'm sure you can actually go on to some parts of the plain. But it's beautiful. The thing about Salisbury Plain for me is it's elevated. It's on elevated ground. And there's some points there where it feels like you can touch the heavens. It is very, very beautiful. And the plain, she has a very seductive charm. And when we looked at some of the monuments that are about 3.5 miles away from Stonehenge, this is Figsbury Ring, and it's a beautiful circular earthwork that could be Neolithic or could have been later Iron Age. But the UFO buffs love this site because there's some buildings in the background that you can see, and that's Porton Down Nuclear Biological Centre. So it's a lot of kind of activity, of unusual lights, are seen around Porton Down. But the plain itself, it really is beautiful because there's no roads there like Avebury. It's really, really quiet, and it has trackways, and you can lose yourself in time and think about all the sounds that our ancient ancestors would have heard about. Turn a corner, and you have really long grass. And touch that grass, lie in the grass. It's feather-like, and the ground is soft as velvet. But turn a corner, and you're reminded that you're on the Salisbury Plain because you've got burnt-out tanks in front of you. And the plain is hard to navigate because wherever you see a red flag, that means you can't turn right, for example. And in some places, you can't even get off the very small lane because it's all military and exploded bombs. And then you can see how the plain has changed from the Neolithic time of its quietness to bombed out buildings that are on the plain as well. But our ancient ancestors loved the Salisbury Plain because it has over 2,000 monuments in an area 25 miles by roughly 25 miles. And we're going to be having a look at the Neolithic people of this beautiful landscape. Now, I'm sure we're all familiar with West Kennet Long Barrow, aren't we? Yep, lots of people been to West Kennet, I'm sure. Yeah, you megalithic maniacs, of course you have. On the Salisbury Plain, they're a bit different to this type of monument. This type of monument is called a Cotswold 7 Barrow, and it's beautiful at West Kennet, as we know. It's got this huge megalithic front, and they're very different on the Salisbury Plain because they don't look like that. It's almost like they have their own flavour, their own identity, and more importantly, their own spirit of place. Because when you go to some of the barrows on Salisbury Plain that you have access to, and you can literally lie on the flat ridges, it's a wonder because you're on elevated ground. And here's one of the barrows of the Salisbury Plain. I always think they look like, you know when you're a kid and you draw little roofs of houses? They look very much like that, and they're very snake-like. They really do have dominance in the landscape. And here's another barrow over here. And this is a twin barrow. There's a barrow in the front and a huge snake-in barrow behind. They're massive on the Salisbury Plain. And when I did that two-point fix using dowsing to find out the sacred people of the landscape, I was thinking, I wonder why that barrow, and we'll come to that in a moment, but this gives you some idea of the extent of the barrows on the Salisbury Plain. There are loads. And it was really interesting that Yori's talk, it was fascinating, wasn't it? I really enjoyed that talk. And he mentioned Stourhead. Can you remember the St. Alfred's Tower? And it had that beautiful light. Well, the same antiquarian that was digging these barrows on Salisbury Plain lived there, created it. Yeah? And there's a kind of occult secret or an occult myth or an occult law, call it what you will, that Sir Richard Colt-Hoare, who was in that place that Yori was describing, was looking for something on the Salisbury Plain, because he was, is believed by some, to have been an occultist or a member of a mystery school. So it's very interesting that we have that link and him looking for something, barrow after barrow, with his kind of the digger, which was called William Cunnington. But the Salisbury Plain, I mean, I would really recommend that you go. This is another huge barrow. There's long barrow after long barrow. And some of them are very large, like this one that you can't have access to. And there's this smaller barrow here. But there's one barrow that really does dominate the Salisbury Plain. Because if you go to a local guidebook, you buy it at Avebury or at Stonehenge, it will tell you one of the largest long barrows in the area is East Kennet Long Barrow, which is quite close to the West Kennet Long Barrow, but it isn't at all. The largest long barrow in England is on Salisbury Plain, and it is huge. It's 390 feet long. It is massive. You walk along there and you feel like you're walking double, treble the distance of the West Kennet Long Barrow, for example. That was my two-point fix. That's where I was kind of guided to have a look at this barrow. And it is colossal, 390 feet long, is about 119 feet wide, and it is massive. And I thought, wow, just like in West Kennet and other long barrows, you always have a lot of skeletons. It was like a communal burial place, or as I think that was its secondary use, and there's probably a primary use long, long before burial, because I think that these monuments are about the living, and they're not just about the dead. So anyway, this was a massive long barrow, and I thought, I really want to find out who was in this barrow, what is it about? And I expected to find in antiquarian reports at the National Monuments Record Office in Swindon that it was down to about sort of 30, 40, 50 people. But it wasn't. It was down to one person. So one person was buried in this massive, massive long barrow. And it was a woman as well. And I thought, wow, that's so different. Again, like I said earlier, we don't hear of the prehistoric women. Yet we know, well, us ladies here anyway, that there is a sensitive side to the monuments. You can have all the mathematics you like. You can have all of the sacred geometry you like. But when I take people around to sacred sites, it's how they feel. It's their experience. So I really do feel that this woman, she must have been like a high queen. She must have been really important to be buried in this massive long barrow. In fact, it's the largest long barrow in northwest Europe. So that does deem her important in some way. So there she was, and I thought, well, I'll read all the antiquarian reports. I'll find out a bit more about her. What was she like? You know, could I see her today? And what was her role going to be? And why was I guided by the two-point fix to be here anyway? And the amazing thing was, I thought, well, I'll start to look about the other barrows nearby. And then a kind of weird thing. As I was reading the old antiquarian reports, they weren't calling them long barrows, they were calling them battle barrows. And that there they felt there was all battles being fought on the Salisbury Plain, that these were the warriors therein. And I thought, that's kind of strange. I'll look into that a bit more. And when Sir Richard Colt-Hoare dug into this barrow with William Cunnington, when they lifted out, obviously there's the skull of this Neolithic woman we'll be seeing in a moment. They were actually real gentlemen in a way. Because even though they kind of ransacked, and again, the cult law said they were looking for something, probably to take into, I don't know, St. Alfred's Tower, for instance, but they were gentlemen, and they put her back. They put her back in her rest place. All was about to change a few decades later. But nearby, this beautiful grave of this Neolithic woman that I like to think of as being a high queen, there was a mass graveyard. There was one barrow on the Salisbury Plain. You can't have access to it. It's in the no-go area. It's always kind of interesting that the no-go areas are where all the amazing kind of different quirky finds are. So if it says no-go, go there first. That would be my top tip. But here it was a mass graveyard, and it's called Bowles Barrow, and Bowles Barrow on the Salisbury Plain is quite different to any other barrow, because all the others that I've shown you, they're all of earth, with some chambers made of timber. This one contained sarsen and bluestones, which would be integrated into Stonehenge at a much later date. And this barrow, Bowles Barrow, like I say, it's a no-go area. When Cunnington and Sir Richard Carlton dug into this one, they found evidence of all of those skulls in that barrow had been murdered. They had what they called cleft skulls. They had been assassinated or killed. So it was like a mass burial place. And some of the boulders that were placed, it was almost like they were keeping them down, and we'll have a look at that later. Were these people suppressed? What happened to them? But imagine this, that they were digging and digging and digging, and because there's so much stone in that barrow keeping these people down, stones were tumbling on top of them, and they gave up, and they only found about 14 skulls. Much later, the grandsons, it's always interesting, like in Malta, that archaeologists sometimes have lots of different family lines carrying on down a tradition. And this is the case with the Cunningtons. Later, their grandson of William Cunnington would go here and they would dig again. And what they found was skull after skull after skull. Again, all different types of murder victims. So something must have happened in the Salisbury Plain in the Neolithic. What happened? What were the monuments like? Who are these people? And one thing that Cunnington noticed was they had very large jaws, for example. And from one antiquarian drawing that was done, this is one of the jaws of the people. And they also noticed no Nephilim here, because these were really short people. So they were really quite kind of short, about 5 feet. They had large jaws, and they also had quite elongated skulls. Cunnington found evidence of some being bandaged there. It doesn't mean all of them were, but there was evidence of that. So maybe they were doing skull modification. Maybe that's what they looked like. Without proper DNA analysis, you'll never really go in to notice. But one thing that always used to kind of intrigue me when I used to go around Avebury with some archaeological-minded people was there was an old saying by one person that used to dig into these graves called John Thurnham. He was the superintendent medical officer of the Asylum of Devizes, and he was into craniology and looking into different sort of skull shapes. And he always said, long barrows, long skulls, round barrows, round skulls. And I thought, I wonder if there is anything in that old saying. And indeed, as we find, it is, because there must have been two people living around Stonehenge at the same time. And there's some archaeological evidence I'll present for that. So they dug into these graves, but this time it was the grandsons, Cunnington, and they weren't so respectful. They dug and they dug and they dug, and they literally obliterated Bowles Barrow, and the skulls would never go there again. They were given to Thurnham, our craniologist from Devizes, and he kept them as a collection. So that was the moment when Salisbury Plain, it's quite sad that these people aren't laid to rest. I mean, I think in a way, the Druid, King Arthur, may be right in what he says. That maybe it would be nice for these people to be returned to their graves, because where are they? When I decided to track the people down, I wanted to look at them, to see who they were, and to really try and get quite close to them, because I'm quite sensitive. I wanted just to kind of feel around the area of the skull. Where are they? They were given by John Thurnham, like they're talking about Victorian era, to Cambridge and Oxford University. So when I went to Cambridge, it was, imagine a room sort of 2 to 3 sizes of this room here, and all you've got is cardboard boxes there and boxes everywhere. And you've got Stonehenge one part and Abydos that side. It's all of the skulls of all of the people there in boxes, which is quite, I wouldn't want my mother to be like that, that's for sure. So here's, this is the central skulls there. They're of the Allens people that were known for skull modification. And there's a drawing from the first William Cunnington, either side, showing a difference between sort of more modern day skulls, which are a bit rounder. So that's a kind of good comparison of one type of skull. And we'll see a longer one soon. But you see, what I think was going on at Stonehenge in the Neolithic period was that there must have been some either skull modification going on or a different type of person in that landscape. And they must have been living side by side with people with more skull shapes like we have, because there was an archaeologist looking into different sort of skulls called Neil. This is at the Bellisnap Long Barrow in Gloucestershire, which proves this point. Who's been to Bellisnap? God, megalithomaniacs. Large amount haven't. You've got to go there. It's a really beautiful barrow with an amazing spirit of place that takes you in a way from the ordinary days that we live in our lives to something pretty extraordinary, because it's got a huge energy line going right the way down north to south that links this mound to Stonehenge and to Avebury. So it's a wonderful horned barrow. And I've just been to, a couple of months ago, to Sardinia with James Swagger, who's going to be given the next presentation. And a lot of the Sardinian barrows are very horned-like, which is interesting because it links into the age of Taurus. Going back to our two different types of people that could have been living in the Stonehenge environs, when there was an excavation at this front, this is called a false front. It's like bricked up. You can't really get in there. The chambers are at the side. So this was being excavated, and it was found that there was an elongated, a much longer skull right by a round skull. So it was thought, you see, that possibly the Beaker people could have come in round about the Bronze Age and introduced it more kind of round-shaped skulls. But it couldn't have, because they were contemporary after some dating. It was thought that they were side by side with one another. So I think we could have noticed the royalty or the ruling people or the priesthood, whoever these people were, that looked slightly different to you and I. They would have been instantly recognizable. We would have known who they were. We're going to be having a look at the ancient landscape through their eyes, and we're going to have a look at some of their monuments and how their memory was tried to be literally wiped out. And it's quite strange, really, that this hasn't been kind of looked into before, because I think, you know, when I was reading some antiquarian reports, I thought, why hasn't this kind of been more out there for people? And it's really strange. Why? Because round about the time when Bellisnap had an excavation, there was a chap called George Rolleston, and he was an old antiquarian type of archaeologist. And they had this belief that the ancient Britons and those with slightly more elongated skulls were thick. They were stupid. They were inferior. And when the more round-skulled people came in, they were Aryan, and they were blonde, and they were blue-eyed, and obviously drop-dead gorgeous. So they were comparing these two type of skulls, and then they thought, and that was the belief system up until recently. Of course, Hitler came along, the Aryan race. They thought, oh no, we can't talk about the skulls like this anymore. So we'll just put that to one side. So I think it's because of that that their memory has gone. Now, Malta, has anyone been to the Hypogeum in Malta? Yeah. Isn't it amazing? What sacred space there? It's absolutely fascinating. Well, it was thought that this is from a newspaper clipping, the top skull there, on this side, closest to me. That's from Malta. They were believed to be elongated there, but trying to track down these skulls. I mean, I've been emailing the archaeological departments in Malta for quite some time, and they say it didn't exist. But these newspaper clippings show that there was elongated skulls in Malta, and when we put them side by side by a Neolithic queen, they become out quite similar. These aren't the cone heads of like Paracas by any stretch of the imagination, but they do show that there was a difference in different types of people around the Stonehenge area. And when we have a look at more an Egyptian skull, like King Tut here, and we compare that to the Neolithic queen, she has a very long skull. And she was the one that came from that huge long barrow. So she, like I said earlier, she must have been considered an important person. And it's really interesting as well that when you kind of look at the energetic properties of the long barrow on Salisbury Plain, we start to understand one thing. Because Yuri was talking about that triangle, wasn't he? And lay energy in that respect with circular energies with the churches of St. Michael on them. The Neolithic, in my opinion, which I will show in my presentation tomorrow, we're looking for particular types of energy. Because once we kind of look at the different energies of the Neolithic monuments to the Bronze Age monuments, I think the Neolithic were harnessing more energy, which we hopefully can prove later. So it was around the Stonehenge area that there's the most elongated skulls. You find the odd one in like West Kennet, Long Barrow. And if you go to Lugbury, Long Barrow, which is not that far from Chippenham, this is the remains of it here, then, I mean, it was a beautiful long barrow. You can just about make out how long it was, and that's been ploughed to one side. And it was really sad when I went there recently, because there was reports of an elongated skull from here, that it was, you know, there's no sign saying it's there. There's a pile of poo, cow poo everywhere, so it stinks. And I just felt really sad, and I did an honouring for the ancestors there, because I thought, really? Is this how we should have our monuments? But when this was excavated, it was found that from the chambers were designated for women, some chambers were designated for men, and there was one chamber that nothing was found in. And we can see it was a kind of like a long shape as well. And that's the stones that have survived the passage of time. Everything else was taken out. And this comes from the Guy Underwood collection, which my family inherited. And he went in to look at the energetic properties of these sites, which I've been looking into myself. So yet more evidence of people that look slightly different within the Wiltshire, Wessex environs. So what type of monuments did they have? We were talking about energy earlier. What type of energy were they looking for? So it's almost like, for me anyway, with the Neolithic queen, because she was in her own barrow, she wasn't with anyone else. This is a communal barrow, so there was lots of people found in this one, again with all the longer skulls. But if we look to the first phase of Stonehenge, for example, which is a picture here from Aubrey Burl. I really like Aubrey Burl. He knew my late father, and he was quite into earth energies and things like that. So he's a wonderful chap. And we see a very narrow entrance to Stonehenge. This is long before the Stonehenge we're familiar with. This was sort of more towards the very first phase when, according to Michael Parker Pearson, with his Riverside project, there was 56 bluestones going round. Predating that could have been timber structures or timber posts in the centre of Stonehenge. But it was these people that marked out the avenue to Stonehenge long before 2500 BC. And all of the posts that we see there, that they call them the A posts, they're all marking out the lunar side of a cycle called the moon's metonic cycle, which happens every 18.61 years. And the heelstone, we are all familiar with the heelstone being very solar, aren't we? People go there, thousands of people go there to Stonehenge to celebrate the solstice. I know I've been there several times, and it's a great festival spirit there, isn't it? Have we been to Stonehenge at the summer solstice? Yeah, it's great. Strange, though, this year, because English Heritage have said that they're banning alcohol at Stonehenge. And what they're doing at Avebury, which is a free site, you can go there day or by night. You can touch the stones, you can kiss the stones, you can do what you like to the stones of Avebury. Unlike Stonehenge, even on private access, you can't touch the stones now. So they're banning the booze from Stonehenge, and they're now saying, we're going to sell booze 24/7 at Avebury. Now, Avebury's a free site, and there's a lot of people thinking, well, why are they doing that? That's insane. And I'm sure there will be some trouble at Avebury. More's the pity, because we don't want that monument cordoned off at all to ka-ching for English Heritage. Anyway, politics aside. So here we have this avenue of Stonehenge laid out to the moon. And the most beautiful thing about it is the heel stone, if that was an early Neolithic stone, it marks precisely the full moon in its midway phase in the Metonic cycle. And it would have risen on the horizon line, this huge moon. So the early Stonehenge people weren't solar. They were marking their monuments out to mark the moon. And the moon's always been more associated with the goddess cult. And in 2019, if we go to Stonehenge, the slaughter stone no longer stands, unfortunately. It's been recumbent for many, many years. But should it have been put up right now, then the moon would be marking there in 2019, which would be a wonderful sight. So when we look at the other entrance, that's the main entrance you're going up to Stonehenge, even today. That's, if you were walking the proper way to Stonehenge, you'd come up the avenue, and it's much wider, as we'll see in a moment. But that would be the first phase. It would have been the moon. And the other entrance to Stonehenge is in the south, and the south is where the moon at its zenith at midnight is there. So again, the other entrance was to the full moon at its zenith, and the front was marking the moon's Metonic cycle. So I really do feel that this was a night experience at Stonehenge, not a day experience at all. So it's a wonderful thing, because I went to a couple of years ago to see if I could see the full moon rise above the heel stone again. And it was terrible, cloudy weather, actually. So you didn't, but there was hardly anyone there. There was, a few people that knew that that was more of a lunar stone. In fact, it was Gerald Hawkins' really famous book, called Stonehenge, that put the heel stone in its fame and glory. But the photographer manipulated that. It's more than 2 meters, according to Aubrey Burl, from where it should be. And most people realize that about Stonehenge. So it was originally at night, probably for a more goddess cult. And I don't think these were always about death. I know there have been ashes found in the Aubrey holes, which were the 56 holes that create a gigantic circle in phase 1 of Stonehenge, around about 3000 BC. But I think these were the places for the living. And when we explore some of the other monuments around the Stonehenge environs, we notice that they too appear elongated. And when we look to the Cursors monument, for example, this is a drawing by William Stukely, sadly long ploughed out, but you can still see the remains of the Cursors. And in my presentation tomorrow, we're going to look at the energetic properties of this elongated monument with some really good evidence to show you that it is what I say is going on. So it's almost like this is a huge, huge monument, 1.7 miles long, dominating the landscape. This was around the time of our Neolithic High Queen of Stonehenge, and it must have been quite majestic looking, because you imagine very large walls, maybe about 6 feet high, of chalk block. It would have looked really bedazzling. Again, these places would have taken you from the ordinary daytime of how you think and how you act into something else. And could it have been at night with the moon dominating the landscape? Because the moon, again, it almost kind of changes our perception, doesn't it? The full moon. We kind of feel very close to nature. Well, a lot of people do round about the time of the full moon. So when we look at that monument, it's very long, it's very stretched out. Sadly, nothing exists of that one today, and the largest Cursus monument, as I'm sure you're aware, is in Dorset. But when we look to other Wiltshire long barrows, again, they become very, very long and elongated. This is Lan Hill Long Barrow near Chippenham in Wiltshire, and it has a few chambers, and part of it's been ploughed away. And it's a beautiful monument, actually. It's a very small chamber to sit in, but you can still do acoustics there. You can still sit in there and really feel an ambience about the place. But that's the monument according to what we see today. But what did it look like in times gone by? Well, my late father inherited all the unpublished manuscripts and surveys by the field archaeologist and master dowser called Guy Underwood. And Guy Underwood went here in the 1930s and the 1940s, and he said it didn't look like that. He said what it looked like was a massive animal effigy, and the remains of this, like we have Serpent Mound in Ohio, isn't it? It weaves and snakes around. He said this was a mythical creature, and this was the last bit. And if you go to Lan Hill, you will notice there's bumps in the ground. There's a big bump in the foreground that I tried to get in, although it wasn't a particularly sunny day. So Lan Hill, it could have been part of a huge monument, much, much bigger than it was today. It could have even represented an animal in its form. So it's a very interesting site to go to. Anyone been to Lan Hill? Yay. You have to go there, the rest of you, aren't you? There's only a couple of hands there. And it's a really lovely site. Well, the next site we're going to have a look at is Wayland Smithy. And Wayland Smithy is a beautiful site, and I'm sure a lot of people have been to Wayland Smithy. And this is quite an unusual barrow because it's north to south. It doesn't face the kind of sun directions or the moon directions. It was Aubrey Burle, incidentally, who pointed out that some of the barrows around closest to Stonehenge are more aligned to the moon. He quotes 9 out of 10 barrows aligned to the moon rather than the sun. So, again, it's pointing to a goddess cult, I feel. This is arranged north-south. It has beautiful megaliths at the front, and anybody that's divined this site has got a huge line going through it. And Gary Biltcliffe discovered the Belinus and the Ellen currents that entwine the Belinus Ley, which starts right at the bottom. He calls it the spine of Britain, goes from the Isle of Wight right the way up to Scotland. The female current comes through this side. And when we start to have a look at the types of energy lines and currents that are associated with these long barrows, they tend to be feminine. We go to West Kennet Long Barrow, and it was the lovely late Hamish Miller that said, it's associated to the Mary line. So sometimes it's like these really do ring out their femininity in the ancient landscape. Now, to esoteric diviners, the most powerful forms of energy aren't lines or circles or spirals, they're a grid. They're squares. There's ancient squares of antiquity. So you have like a lunar square, you'd have all the planetary squares. And in ancient China, it was said that the power of the land came out of a sea in the shape of a turtle, and on the turtle's back was a Saturn square, and that's where you get all of these numbers, and they always add up to 15, no matter which way, in this little grid of 9 boxes would always add up to the number 15. And to esoteric diviners, that is the most sacred form of earth energy that you will ever have. And it's almost like the ancient priesthood pushed these symbols into the land. Like I said, they were recorded in ancient China, revered. Anyone that has their house, feng shuied, you have to walk it in what's called the 9 walks. It's a way to walk around sacred space to tune into its energy. So as you walk around in a particular way, that's walking the 9 roots of the Saturn square. Now here, just to one side of the barrow. Everybody goes along the barrow and to either side. But just over to one side, you have a massive square of antiquity, which means the esoteric priesthood would have worshipped in that part on the square of antiquity. And it's very, very powerful to divine or to douse. It's also said in ancient China that there is never just one, there's two. They're like portals, if you will. You have one square that lets you kind of in, and then one square that lets you out. And that's how occultists would work with the houses, with their homes. And we were looking at the stately homes of Yuri's talk. And to the best of my knowledge, when you have the entrance, just outside of the entrance, you go through the opening way through a square. The Masons really do like Saturn. That's their favorite square. So they would go through a Saturn square. Here, it's a lunar square. And I'll be taking some people around there. And I always show them the magical squares of antiquity, because they are very, very special. Avebury doesn't have any. Rollright does, and so does Stonehenge. So I feel that through the eyes of our ancients, they had the mathematics in the land through the Saturn squares. It was a way of walking around a monument. It was a way of walking around a church, because churches never used to have pews, for example. Used to walk around in a particular manner. There's a very ancient esoteric rite to do with churches, for instance, that the Masons certainly love. It's called the Bishop's Run. Not that bishops run at all doing this. They actually walk around. But you go in. Do you know when you get to a church and it has two doorways normally, doesn't it, in churches, yeah? We've seen that, yeah? And normally, the one door is always closed and the other door is open. That's for the likes of you and I, us as commoners, if you will. We go in through one door like that, and we go and we sit down in our pew. When the bishop comes to town, or when the Masons come to town, or your mystery school, the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, still do this. When they go into a church, they will make sure both doors are open. That's why it's called the Bishop's Run. All bishops do it. The doors remain open. And you would walk in a certain way. You go to an energy point in the church, which is said to imbue you with spiritual expansion and spiritual energy, if you will. And then you must never go out of the same door again. Otherwise, your aura will shrink back. So if we imagine that you kind of have a really expansive aura, and then it will shrink back if you go through the same way. Well, it's like that at ancient sites. The Templars used that very ancient way of going in and out of a monument. And at Wayland Smithy, you would walk around it in a certain way, if all the ancient traditions are indeed correct. So it's a wonderful way to experience a monument. And in fact, all large manor houses are built in that way. You will have your in way through one square and your exit through the other. And you have certain rites and certain rituals that you would do depending on which square was associated with it. When I was shown, and it's magical. When I was shown it at Stonehenge once by a master dowser, he's a European commissioner actually, not voted in. You find that in Europe and places, all the really kind of high-ranking people, they're normally through a mystery school in some way. And we were on private access, and we couldn't get the whole monument to ourselves. And he said, well, I'm going to show you how to activate a Saturn square inside, and we'll have the monument to ourselves, because people that aren't resonating to that type of earth energy, they just leave. They won't know why. They just go out and look at something else. I thought, I'm not a believer in anything. I thought, yeah, right, this I've got to see. And he was tapping away on the Saturn square. You always do it to 1 and 15 because it's a mathematical code of 15. And within about 5 minutes, the other tour group that was sharing the space with us just started to walk off. They were all mooching around the Heelstone, and then they were going to other places alike. And I thought, wow, that's pretty good. And then suddenly my own head started to kind of ring quite quite badly, and I realized that I myself couldn't even handle that energy, so I had to go out of the monument, which was a bit of a pity, but I did. But there was another style of monument that the Neolithic people of Stonehenge, the elongated ones, created, and they were causewayed enclosures. And causewayed enclosures are a wonderful monument in their own right. I have one near Avebury called Windmill Hill. I'm sure there's lots of us megalomaniacs been to Windmill Hill, have we? Yeah, it's fantastic. I mean, we drove past Robin Hood's Ball. This is quite close to Stonehenge today, and the red flag was flying, which meant you can't turn off because you'll have probably a missile going over your head or something. So you couldn't actually go into here today because I wanted to take some photographs, and it's quite often out of bounds. In the old drawing that we have of Robin Hood's Ball here, it was an amazing monument in its own right. They were, again, like concentric circles of energy, and we're going to have a look for the evidence of why our ancient Neolithic people created all of the causeways across Europe to particular types of energy. And there's a lot of evidence for that. I'm really excited to share that with you tomorrow. But in this monument here, we have lots of concentric circles, and they were like partly a wall with a gap. So you had lots of gaps in these monuments. So they couldn't have been for like cattle or anything like that. Lots of different causeways to enter this monument. So what was going on there? It's always labelled like they're ritual monuments, they're for past ceremonies. I don't think causeway enclosures were necessarily for people at all. But according to a lot of people, they thought they're for ceremony and for ritual. We're going to challenge the old order tomorrow and have a look at these monuments through new eyes. But Robin Hood's Ball would have probably looked quite similar to all those concentric circles. And when we have a look at the vestiges of Windmill Hill, we can still make out all of the ditches here. We can see them clearly. This is Busty's drone shot of Windmill Hill. So these ditches have survived over the passage of time, and then you have the round barrows of a much later era placed upon Windmill Hill, the Bronze Age round barrows, and the large round barrow to the fore is where the Mary and Michael energy currents cross, because they were the type of energies that the Bronze Age people were looking for. The Neolithic wasn't really looking for Mary and Michael as such. I think they were a little bit more advanced in terms of earth energy than just looking for earth currents. They understood everything about the earth energy side of it. But here we can clearly see that there is a lot of evidence for that monument. But if you go to other causewayed enclosures, it's almost like the memory of them was taken away in some way. And we'll have a look at that in a moment. And when we return to Stonehenge and have a look at what happened to that lovely lunar goddess entrance to Stonehenge, we can see the top diagram shows you the narrow, it was about 10 or so meters across. And then around about sort of 2500 BC or thereabouts, it was widened, much, much bigger, so that the midsummer sun would be in near alignment to the heel stone. So it was changed. So what went on in 2500 BC? Well, all of those people that looked slightly different, whether they were the ruling elite, whether they were the priesthood, they were all murdered. Because a lot of from Bowles Barrow, all of the people were murdered in that barrow, and children weren't spared. Nobody was spared in that massacre, if that's what happened then, because there's little children that had been cleft, their skulls as well. So it's almost like we're going to get rid of the memory. And in Bowles Barrow, that one with all of the stones I talked about earlier, it was all males. And they were all murdered. One was, in fact, beheaded, according to an antiquarian report by William Cunnington. So, I mean, that is extreme violence against a group of people. And why? What happened to those people to have made them behead people and kill children? And then during that time period, they changed everything from a lunar cult to a solar-orientated cult. So there's a big shift in emphasis. And what they did to the causewayed enclosures, according again to an antiquarian report and a more modern day archaeological report about Robin Hood's ball, it was mentioned that you can't hardly see anything. It was almost like it was decommissioned. It was flattened, because in one of the quotes was, this couldn't just happen with antiquity. So what they're saying is, were they actually infilled, the ditches? Windmill Hill survived. The one near Stonehenge certainly didn't. It's probably flattened. And what about the long barrows? Today, we walk into the barrows freely. We can walk into West Kennet, Lang Hill. We can mooch around the stones of Ludbury Monument. What happened about 2500 BC to the long barrows? They were completely decommissioned. And by decommissioned, what I mean is they were infilled with dirt and dirt and dirt, so that all of if it was a secondary use at West Kennet, for example, it could have been that they were built by the Neolithic people, and then when they were being decommissioned, around about 2500 BC, the bones were placed in, and then they were all packed in really tightly with earth, so that nobody would enter that monument again. It was decommissioned and sealed off. And almost like in the style of Indiana Jones, that huge blocking stone at West Kennet was put in front, sealing off those people into that monument for all time. Now, the ones in West Kennet weren't all elongated, or there was one skull found in there, and that happened all across Europe. Now, it's said, for example, that happened because it was a change in emphasis. It was going from a lunar cult to a solar cult. But we're looking again at these ancient people through the eyes of the sun, the eyes of the moon, the eyes of the monument. What about the people? Was it the people that caused that change? Was it a changeover from the more longer, elongated people of the Stonehenge environs to a new group that put to death all of the other people and changed the order, if you will? Because from that time onwards, no more elongated monuments were being built or constructed or probably even thought about. Everything went to the circle. You had stone circles being built. You had round barrows being built of the Bronze Age period. So it's that critical crossover time of our history that something must have happened in that area. And when we look at some of the wonderful barrows around Stonehenge, and there was one wonderful antiquarian report, they said at one point there could have been 800 barrows around Stonehenge, and there was an archaeological man and woman team, the Woodwards, who drew Stonehenge surrounded by two concentric circles of barrows. So if we imagine Stonehenge there, masses of barrows in circles going around Stonehenge. And it's a wonderful, huge barrow. And I'm really proud of this barrow because it's called the Cursus Barrow, and it's quite close to Stonehenge, and I'm sure we've been there before. And that was saved because of a dowser. Those barrows at the Cursus Monument wouldn't have survived, but there was one chap, that Master Dowser I mentioned earlier, who was also a field archaeologist called Guy Underwood. He saw the end of the Cursors being bulldozed, and he thought, right, I'm going to stand in front of this barrow and a set of barrows, and you're going to have to plough through me if you're going to destroy this ancient site. And he stood there. He just refused to go, and it survived because of him. So Guy, what he realized about the Bronze Age cult in terms of earth energy, everything changed. Everything changed in the round period. And we'll have a look at the different types of energy tomorrow. But this is an aerial shot that I took of the Cursus barrows. They lie roughly sort of east-west, and there's some other, well, there was a lot more barrows there that have long been destroyed. And it's really interesting when you kind of go to these barrows. They do have a spirit of place quite unique to themselves. And we can see there's ditches around some of them because all the ditches have been infilled by West Kennet, would have had two flanking ditches, and so for all the other monuments. But it was here in the Neolithic period where our forerunners of Stonehenge and the forerunners of Avebury and places were living and moving around that landscape. And it was almost like they were fantastic geologists. Because, for example, at Windmill Hill, it's the place where you get different types of energies. I mean, I'm sure we've heard of John Burke, haven't we, as megalithomanias? John Burke, he looked into the nature of magnetic energies around mounds such as these and around ancient sites. And in his way of seeing things, what the ancient ancestors could do with mounds and ancient sites was they would put grain inside them, and the electromagnetic energy field associated to underground water and other types of geological features generate an electromagnetic field to enhance the crop growth. That was his idea. And he did prove it quite well by, putting his money where his mouth is and doing examples and controls of seeds growing in a magnetic field and those that don't. And certainly the ones that were put into an electromagnetic field enhanced the energy growth. So I think John Burke was right, but for the wrong reasons. I mean, he's saying that's what was going on. Well, when you have a look at where monuments are placed in the Neolithic period, for instance, like Robin Hood's Ball and various other causeways enclosures, there's one geological fact that will repeat itself and repeat itself and repeat itself. In fact, it was the archaeologist Tim Champion that inspired John Burke to look into these types of things. And what it was found is where the upper chalk aquifers of deep water meet the lower chalk aquifer. So that creates the energy field. So how did our ancient ancestors know that? It's truly amazing. Did they divine it with dowsing rods, for example? Did they feel the energies? Were they more sensitive than us here today? Could well be. Or could they hear things slightly different to what we do here today? Regardless of how they found it, they did. They found these unusual meeting points of these aquifers, and they placed their monuments upon them. So they were doing that for a reason. And one thing that I have learned throughout my journey through ancient sites is our ancient ancestors always did something for a reason. Whether it was through mathematics, astronomy, they were doing things for a reason. So when we have a look back to the people of Stonehenge and the way they interacted with their monuments, what could have that Neolithic queen look like? If you have a look to the Huns, for example, which I'll show in the next slide, we see how her skull has been manipulated. It could have been the fact that there were some people around the Stonehenge area that indeed looked like that. So it's part of our living history in a way, because the monuments themselves have stood the test of time. Stonehenge, Avery, they have stood majestically as power places for more than 4,500 years. And yet the people are often overlooked, sadly. And what I feel that these people they were really in tune with nature. They were really in tune with the land. Because at Causeways enclosure, if you can hang around long enough to about 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock in the morning, and you take your shoes off, and you're on the grass, and it's always a bit cold, even in the summer, and you've got all the July bugs flying around, so I always got a hoodie on. And you stand on one of those concentric circles that we saw earlier on a causeway enclosure, and you just relax with your feet slightly apart. And it was my late father and the diviners that showed me this. Round about 3 o'clock in the morning, it can be later at times, you feel the ground slightly move with what they call the shear force. The shear force happens as well at sunset and at moonset as well. Whenever the sun or moon passes a point on the horizon at dawn and at sunset, something magical happens to standing stones and to monuments, whether it's made of earth or made of stone. The ground reacts to the monument. 5 minutes. So what happens is, in that when you're stood on these areas, all ancient sites were sited within 1 to 2 miles of a fault line. That's fact. Again, how our ancient ancestors found that is a magical thing. But they knew about fault lines. They knew about the geology. And when the sun or moon crosses that horizon line, it was found that the fault line would produce like a ripple of energy like this, and the stones react to that. So I think it's not just the stones reacting to the earth energies, it's the people as well. Because if you go there with the conscious decision to interact with the Saturn square, the conscious decision to interact with the lunar square, Mary, Michael, energy lines, and you do that conscious intent, you become a part of the ancient landscape. And that's what I think these wonderful Neolithic people did. They were aware of the different types of energies, they were working with them, and I don't think they were all about people. I think they were generating something, and that's what we're going to have a look at tomorrow. But this is the history of Stonehenge, and as a woman here today, I have been inspired by a lot of women, such as Dolores Cannon, the late Dawn Carroll, and this woman has inspired us to relook at the Stonehenge environs through different eyes. Thank you.